rent controls. Okay, we do have, as we point out, a shortage of apartments, so that the equilibrium rent in a small city is $900. At some point in the past, it was at a fair rent, $600, let's say, and at that rent, there was no shortage. And then as inflation has continued, or as population has increased, the demand has gone up in money terms, and what has happened is that now we have $900. So let's assume then that the city council steps in, passes an ordinance that rolls back the rent to the old price of $600, okay? So initially, we have 700 apartment units available. That's the fixed stock, the short run or immediate run vertical supply curve, intersecting with the demand curve, D1, okay? But now it no longer intersects at $600, okay? We have 300 more people and households who wish to live in this city in a rental unit than are available, okay? So there's 1,000 people desiring to rent and only 700 units available. So we have an immediate shortage. Now, the reason why we have this shortage is because people are using space wastefully, okay? In other words, despite the popular view, and the view of left-wingers, that, well, if you allow the price to rise back to $900, or if you take off rent controls in New York City, people will be living out in the streets. Well, that's simply not true, okay? People are very ingenious in finding arrangements by which they can conserve on living space. So, for example, college students living in New York City, if you live in a two-bedroom apartment and you have one roommate, you would take on two more roommates, okay, which would allow you then to pay the rent, okay, the higher rent. And at the same time, you'd be economizing on space. Multifamily arrangements would occur. This certainly occurred with immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe in the 1870s to 1920s. You had more than one family living in an apartment. If you have a widow whose husband has passed away, obviously, and her children are gone, living in a three-bedroom apartment, she may very well then, at the higher rent, begin to rent to other seniors, okay, to conserve on space and to save money. Okay, it doesn't mean people are going to be thrown out and living in the streets. People are very ingenious. They don't need bureaucrats to tell them what kind of living arrangements to make. In New York City, there's no controls on luxury apartments, quote unquote, but these are just tiny, small apartments that have been built in the 1990s and so on that aren't subject to price controls. And yet there arose a phenomenon called mingles, okay, where single people would live together, even a male and a female, but not in a romantic relationship. It was just another social adjustment to the higher price or higher rent. Okay, so you would, in the short run, then, if you took off the rent control, find that through alternative arrangements and so on, people would adjust. That is, the quantity demanded of apartment units would decrease, okay? Other people would move out to the suburbs and undertake a more costly commute at the higher rent, so there is elasticity in the supply curve. People think that there's a fixed amount of houses, a fixed amount of people, and if there's more people demanding at the lower rent than there is supply of houses, then you're going to get some people living in the streets. Of course, that's not true, okay, as I've just shown, okay? Now, what are the supply side effects? Okay, these are very interesting. The supply side effects are such that in the long run, not only are you going to freeze the shortage, but the shortage is going to get worse. That is, over time, the owners of apartment buildings will adjust. That is, you'll move down your supply curve. Okay, they'll take some of the units off the market. Now, the units will come off the market in a number of ways. First way is what we called in the New York metropolitan area back in the 80s and 90s, condomania. Okay? Remember, the price for this property of the landlord is only controlled on the rental market. Now, if New York City, for some reason, put a control on the, let's say, salaries of accountants, okay, in New York City, in order to make business more attractive by lowering costs and so on. Okay, what would occur? Well, since the accountant's salary is controlled in one market, he would be able, or she would be able, to move to other markets. They would move geographically to other Baltimore, Boston, or wherever, on the one hand, over time, or they would move out of accounting. Okay? Well, the same thing is true in the rental market. There's no control on what you can sell condos for or what you can sell co-ops for, so many of these rental units will be taken off the market and transformed into co-ops and condos. Okay? So you get a shrinkage of the rental market, and the shortage will grow from 300 to, in this particular case, 600 units. Shortage will grow worse. But that's not the worst of it on the supply side. What will occur is that you'll find that almost immediately, as costs continue to rise, utilities, taxes, the costs of maintenance labor for the buildings, as those costs continue to rise, they're not controlled, the profit margins will be squeezed. So the owners of the rental units, okay, if they're not going to turn them into condos and so on, will begin to cut down on costs. And the way to cut down on costs in the market for apartments is to cut down on maintenance. Now, that's not a big deal if you live in a middle-income or upper-income apartment. All right, they fire the doorman. They don't paint the common areas as frequently. Their response time to problems in the apartments become, instead of 2 days, maybe a week or 2 weeks. The apartment doesn't become unlivable. But in a low-income apartment, which is by definition no frills, you begin to get a deterioration of the physical building itself. The heating system goes out in the middle of the winter, and it's not fixed for a week or 2 weeks, or at all. Okay? Lights in the common areas, if the bulbs burn out or the fixture is smashed, they're not replaced. So the hallways become havens for junkies and so on. Okay? Broken windows in the halls aren't replaced. So you begin to get a deterioration into slums. Okay? So the result then is a further, in the long run, deterioration and of not only deterioration of the housing stock, but a further reduction in the quantity supply. Okay? As after a while, the taxes and utilities the costs are higher than the rents that they're getting, so that the landlords literally walk away from the buildings. And then the city takes over, and the city is the worst possible landlord, okay, as many tenants can attest, and the tenants get almost no services. And there's a very interesting article, which I would like to read you, by a landlord, or former landlord. This was written a while ago in the 1970s, and it was entitled, "I Was a Slumlord." It's very, very revealing because it gives you specific statistics and data about what resulted from the price controls or rent controls in New York City. It starts off, "I was a slumlord. Here's how I came to be one. I was born 69 years ago. I learned the craft of cabinet making in my native land, Hungary. This would have been my 50th year of working actively, creating in wood many things of lasting beauty. My name is well known and well respected in the trade. About 20 years ago, I bought a small factory building in East Harlem, where I worked together with my team of 10 to 12 men. With changes, improvements, and additional construction, the factory cost me about $65,000. A few years after I bought the building, the adjoining building, number 510, was offered to me at a bargain price because it was in poor repair. With the idea of expanding my workshop into it or using the lot for parking, I bought it. For $12,500 in cash, I became the owner of a 4-family house." So remember, he is talking about, it's 1972 when this is written, and so these are 1952 prices. The 4 families living in the house are all decent working people. To my knowledge, they do not need and never ask for charity, public assistance, or help. Yet the law forces me to give them shelter and heat at lower prices than my own cost. So he points out that for several years, his cash expenses have exceeded his income by about 25%. Those are his out-of-pocket cash expenses for utilities and taxes, okay? And this without interest or amortization on the mortgage. So he's not even covering the mortgage, okay, or paying a penny towards it. The building was in poor repair when I bought it. By now, it is the favored hunting ground of every city inspector. The building needs a new roof, new walls, new ceilings, new plumbing, new wiring, new doors, and a new heating system. It needs about $15,000 worth of repairs. The building now has a gross income of $2,600 a year. Okay, so he's getting $2,600 a year in gross rents, of which I am paying for taxes and heat about $3,000. So every year he's losing $400. Why didn't I apply for a hardship rent increase? My accountant told me there would be a blizzard of paperwork, and any increase that he could get him his fee would more than eat up. Okay, at least the first 2 years of the increase would go to the fee for the accountant. So far, I've been fined 4 times for failure to comply with orders to correct building violations. I was summoned to court again only a few weeks ago, explained my predicament to the judge, assured me of his sympathy, and then fined him $40 and promised that the next fine would be much more burdensome. Okay, I did not go home from the court. I went straight to the offices of the local Roman Catholic Church and asked them to accept the building as a free gift. They didn't. Of course, they're not. Okay. They're not economically ignorant. I mean, they're holy, but they're not stupid. Okay, an hour later, I made the same offer to the Protestants. Okay, obviously the Protestants are no dumber than the Catholics. Again, the answer was no. Next, I offered the building free, without any money, to the 4 tenants. They didn't want it. Of course they didn't. They'd have to come up with the extra $400 at least. Okay, I will abandon the building was my next thought. I will stop collecting rents, will not pay taxes or heat. I will let the city take over. This sounds like an easy way out, but my lawyer tells me it cannot be done without my being legally, financially responsible. So here I am with a building assessed by the city at $21,000 that you can't give away. So it's basically garbage, okay? And yet they're assessing it for tax purposes at $21,000 that I cannot give away, I cannot sell, and I cannot abandon. I am forced by law to operate. He's sort of a serf to his own building, okay? So you can't get away from it. That is, I am not any longer. I have sold the building for $30,000. Okay, now how do you do that? As an extra inducement, I threw into the bargain my factory building. So he gives up his business, okay, which cost me close to $70,000 for nothing. So he threw in the factory building for nothing, and he got $30,000 for the whole. In economic terms, he really sold both buildings for $30,000. In other words, I sold real estate that cost me $80,000 about 15 years ago, okay, for $30,000 to be paid without interest in 6 years. So it's much less than $30,000. With the $50,000 that I lost in the deal, which is a major part of my life savings, I bought freedom. At 69, I am too old to start a revolution or to fight City Hall. On the other hand, I do not like to be summoned to appear in criminal court. My only crime is that I dare to own a building in New York. I'll badly miss my shop where I spent 49 happy years, but I am no longer a slumlord. Okay. Well, this is, now think about this happening on a vast scale in New York City. And what do you get? You get abandoned buildings, okay, you know, even though it's against the law, this guy was law-abiding. The landlords just walk away from these buildings, okay? And you get the spectacle of the South Bronx. Now, economists have said, and it may have come from Milton Friedman and George Stigler and their famous critique of rent controls written in early 1950s called roofs or ceilings. That if you have price ceilings, you're not going to have roofs. You're not going to have new housing built or housing maintained. And they said, the statement they made was that the easiest way to destroy a city besides bombing it is to impose rent controls. So what we have here is a series of pictures of bombings, of cities that were bombed out during World War II, and some pictures of photos of what the South Bronx looked like, I guess in the 1980s or so. Okay, so let me just show you some of these. Okay, is that bomb damage or rent control? I have the answers on the back. Okay, that's bomb damage, right? That is Aachen, Germany. I think one of those was Hans Hoppe's house. But, bomb damage or rent control? Yeah, that's rent control. That is the that's the Bronx. It's hard to tell, but that looks like what? I'll tell you what it is. I think that's the bomb damage. Yeah, that's Hiroshima. It is. Okay. No, that's Nagasaki.
That's out of focus.
Yeah, it's out of focus what that is. Let me get that in focus for you. There we go. That's also, that's Hiroshima. That, I believe, is rent control. Yes, it is. That's the Bronx. That's rent control again. Get that in focus. It's hard to tell. I would venture bomb damage. Yeah, that's Nagasaki again. Yeah, that's rent control. And last but not least, yeah, that's rent control also. Okay, that's the South Bronx. Okay. No. Okay. So you get a deterioration of the housing stock and a shrinkage of the housing stock from conversions and from abandonments. Okay. You also get a spillover of demand, okay, to the condominium markets. Price of condominiums go up. Houses in surrounding areas, the price of houses in New Jersey and Connecticut that are within commuting distance, they're forced up, so you do get that diversion of demand, okay? But you also get a number of other effects. You get tenant immobility, which is an interesting phenomenon. That is, you might have in a neighborhood let's say an older woman living in a 4-bedroom house who had been there for years, okay, since rent control was, let's say, imposed in 1946, or maybe she inherited from someone that was in who lived there when rent control was imposed. And yet, you might have a family of 6 living, around the block from her in a 2-bedroom apartment. People don't move. Okay, with no rent control, there's a natural flow, right? Because the 4-bedroom apartment, all other things equal, is more expensive than the 2-bedroom apartment. But under rent control, the longer you've been there, okay, because it's generally what we call vacancy decontrol, which I'll get into in a moment, the lower the price you're paying. So you don't get this natural flow that you would get on the free market where a single woman would, to cut her costs, move into a building with 1 bedroom, okay? In fact, if she leaves her apartment, she has to wait on that long line that we showed. Okay? There's a long waiting list for apartments. That's how that shortage manifests itself. And number 2, even if she gets an apartment, the apartment prices have risen in the meantime. They're allowed to rise in New York City. There's partial vacancy decontrol by 15% every time a new tenant moves in. So she'd be paying a higher price, okay, in many cases. So you get a massive misallocation of resources where you have one family, maybe 2 families jammed into a 2-bedroom apartment and a single person, in a 3 or 4-bedroom apartment. That does not occur on the free market, obviously, because the pricing reflects the differences in the amount of space. Okay. You also get what we call non-price rationing, where landlords can now indulge their personal preferences and prejudices. You get allocation by race, lifestyle, pets, children. Okay. People of races that are not as well liked by the landlord will be turned away because he knows there's this huge shortage and that someone he likes will show up, okay? In other words, what we might call the opportunity cost of discrimination falls, okay? Also, people with children and pets, since pets and children cause noise that annoy other tenants and also raise maintenance costs, they are not a desirable family to rent with families with these, so they turn them away. Even though it's against the law, they have ways of turning these people away. In fact, I give my undergraduates my example of what I call the lecherous landlord. Let's say he'll only rent to females between 18 and 25 years of age. Okay, he'll turn everyone else away. And let's assume that he has an apartment. Now, on a free market, he has to pay for that. In a sense of foregone rents, because he'll have a greater vacancy rate. Okay, and let's assume for a moment that he has he charges $1,000 a month on a free market. Let's say the rent is $1,000 a month. He has 20 units. Okay, and that he can rent them, his vacancy rate maybe is, one unit at any given time is not rented out on the free market, okay? Now there's suddenly a rent control, and now he's limited to, let's say, $500 a month, okay? Now what he can do, okay, or actually before we do that, let's say he discriminates on the free market. If he discriminates on the free market, let's say his vacancy rate then goes up to 5, okay? And so what we got is at $1,000 a month, which is the equilibrium rent, he has 20 units to rent out. On a free market, he may have vacancy of 5 if he keeps turning away people that don't meet his criterion, which is young female, 18 to 25. So it's going to cost him the 5 vacant units, which on average is what he has, times $1,000 a month times the 12 months. It's going to cost him $60,000 a year to indulge his prejudice, okay? Or in this case, his positive preference for a certain type of person, okay? Now, what happens if suddenly you have rent controls and the price is $750, okay? Well, he knows that there are many people out there, so if he turns, there's a huge shortage. So if he turns one person away, it's very likely that someone else will show up. What happens is that $60,000 a year falls possibly to 0, okay? He has almost no vacancies because of the massive shortage. He can find the people that he likes because they're not able to find apartments. So obviously, according to the law of demand, a person will indulge this preference at a more likely to indulge his preference at a lower price than at a higher price, okay? And then all crazy things that are in the lease, okay, are actually enforced. Because with vacancy decontrol, you want your tenants to leave. Because the next tenant will bring you 15% more, okay? That's as it works in New York City. So for example, if you ever lived in an apartment, you read your lease, basically you can't do anything after 10 o'clock except breathe. Can't have unrelated people staying overnight, can't play the television set. If you live in garden apartments, as I have done, you can't wash your car in a parking lot, you can't have any pets, and all of these crazy. But they don't enforce them necessarily. They only are there to protect the landlord and the other tenants against someone who's very, very noisy or someone who is disruptive. So it's legally easier to get them out, to evict them. So what happened when we had, under Nixon's wage and price controls, a lot of small towns, okay, New York has had rent controls the longest, by the way, from 1946 onward. But after World War II, rent controls were taken off in most of the rest of the country. They reinstated in the early 1970s with the wage price freeze that was imposed by Nixon. And from my own personal experience, I lived in southern New Jersey where most of the towns did not at the time impose wage and price controls. So when I moved in there, I noted that it said no pets, and we had a cat. And so I asked one of the neighbors, I said, do we have to hide our pets or what? She says, no, they never enforce it, okay. And also I noted that people were washing their cars in open daylight out in the parking lot and so on, which in the lease said you weren't allowed to do. And I moved to northern New Jersey, where they did impose rent controls. Okay, and those rent controls stayed on even after Nixon's wage and price controls ended. They stayed on throughout the 70s in many places. And so I figured it's the same thing. They're not going to enforce these. So my neighbor comes running over as I was moving in, and she saw the cat. She says, "You better hide that cat." And I said, "Why?" And she says, "Well, the landlord hires kids, like a Gestapo group of kids that goes around during the day when you're at work and looks in the windows to see if anybody has pets, and then sends you an eviction notice because he can charge the next tenant more." Okay. So, and also I noted people at night with flashlights washing their car at midnight, okay, because they're hiding from the land. So all of these sort of fascistic clauses in the rental agreement, the lease agreement, are now enforced because they don't. If one tenant leaves, well, you know what? We have other tenants out there waiting to come in, okay, would-be tenants, prospective tenants, all right? And I personally know of a landlord. I mean, it goes beyond now just neglecting the building. Okay, landlords become the enemy of tenants, and so there's sort of a class warfare between, especially in New York City, if you ever see it. Tenants are always picketing landlords. Landlords are always bad-mouthing tenants. They hate one another. Okay, and the reason being that the landlord would love to have the tenant out of there, and so he makes conditions as unpleasant as possible for the tenant. Okay, and I personally know of a landlord that allowed a band to practice until all hours of the night in a vacant apartment to drive the other tenants out. Okay, okay. So you get that type of malicious behavior by landlords. Now, do you hate the person who you buy an automobile from? Do you hate the guy you rent the hotel room from? Of course not. But if there were similar types of controls, and it was in the interest of those people to allow these products that you're buying and services to deteriorate, then there would be an abiding hatred, as there is in New York City. I was shocked when I went to Houston in the mid-1980s during the oil bust, and tenants and landlords said hello to one another. Okay, I stayed at a friend's apartment, and not only that, there were advertisements all over. Free 6 months rent, first six months rent free, free microwave ovens were being given away. There was a lot of competition. There were no rent controls. There was continual building going on. They had overbuilt because of the oil bubble that had occurred, and so there was competition. That kept the rents low. Okay. A few other points I want to make about rent control. One of the most interesting, let's say, unintended consequences of rent control occurred in France. Okay. After World War II, France had had rent controls for a long time, okay, on and off from the end of World War, or the beginning of World War I. And what happened in that case was that the only way you could find an apartment was through the black market. Okay. In New York, you have these black market arrangements. You have people going and bribing either the janitor or the superintendent to be placed higher on the list, okay? Or they would sell you, they would charge key money. They would charge you $2,000 for your key, okay? And that was a way of getting around the rent controls. But in France, it went much further than that. There was absolutely no way of getting an apartment. Young couples, soldiers that returned, had to live with, when they got married, they had to live with their in-laws, which is not a great thing to do, okay? Especially when you're first married. And so the wife's full-time job was to go around to the parks in Paris and find the most sickly-looking older person. I'm serious. I mean, there's an article by an economist about this, just describing this phenomenon. Follow them home, and then find out their address, and then go immediately to the superintendent, or what they call in France a concierge, and pay them a big bribe. Okay. I think it's $1,500 a room or something, to be the first one notified. And so then you would immediately move your furniture in as soon as the person was being carried, before they were even cold. So if they're being carried out, you get the call and you rush over there. By the way, rents, this was after World War II, rents after World War II were between $1 and $1.50. Okay, $1 for a single person, for a family, was average about $1.50. That's about between 6 and 11 packs of American cigarettes at the time. Okay, which were circulating also as sort of a quasi-money in France. All right. So I'm sure the government's intent was not to turn Parisians into a city full of ghouls, that sort of followed old people around waiting for them to die. I mean, it's absurd, but it happened. I mean, okay. I recommend that article. It's called "No Vacancies" by Bertrand de Jouvenel, a political economist, actually. He's wrote on political philosophy as well as on economics. Okay. There's a key question we want to ask here, and that is, as Murray Rothbard would always say, cui bono, meaning, in Latin, who benefits? Cui bono. Okay, who benefits from rent controls? Well, we can think of it in the following way. According to popular belief, Well, it's the small group of greedy landlords that are hurt by rent controls, and it's the large group of poorer tenants that benefit from rent controls. Okay? So the large, less wealthy group is benefiting at the expense of these small, greedy, rapacious landlords. Okay? Now, that view is completely wrong, of course. In many cases, okay, especially with middle and upper income apartments, the landlord might very well be less wealthy than his or her tenants. Okay? But there's something else that we have to really point out here. The people that benefit are the existing tenants, tenants that have the apartments under rent control. Those people who, on the diagram, are the 400 lucky enough in this town to have those apartments. Okay? And now, so the existing tenants benefit, but there's another group of tenants. They're prospective tenants. They're the people that have just, let's say, gotten married and want to stay in that neighborhood, but cannot find an apartment. Okay? They're the people who have been have their jobs shifted into that city and would like to live in the city near their jobs, but can't find an apartment, and therefore must undertake longer commutes into the city. The landlords certainly are hurt, but so are these prospective tenants. Okay, now, of course, who else benefits? The politicians and rent control board. Okay, they benefit. Okay, they get reelected. Okay, they appear on the one hand as friends of the poor, but on the other hand, of course, the poor people are another one of the victims of rent control. The lower income tenants are living in buildings with very poor or no services. Okay, buildings that may have very well been abandoned, they're still living there. Okay, so we got a list of victims: the landlords, prospective tenants, and lower income tenants, okay, whose buildings have turned into slums. The beneficiaries are the existing tenants who tend to be middle class and upper class, or middle and upper income tenants. Politicians and the rent control board, you know, people get jobs and enforce all these regulations. Okay. Why then did these things get passed? Well, this is a political economy question. They get passed because who votes in large numbers? Do lower income people tend to vote in as great proportion as higher income and middle? Of course not. Okay, so it's the existing tenants who vote first of all, and it tends to be the middle and upper income tenants who contribute to campaigns and vote, and they are the ones who are vitally interested in maintaining rent controls. Okay, the prospective tenants, they can't get apartments in the city, so they don't vote. Okay, so you don't have to worry about them. You don't have to worry about the lower income tenants. They don't vote or contribute, or they don't vote in as great numbers. And you can appeal to the ones that do vote by saying that you're keeping the prices low for them. Okay, so what you get then is basically rent controls being a government welfare program for for middle and upper class tenants. And there was a great article, which I'll read, a part of which I'll read to you, in the Wall Street Journal, pointing out just who benefits from rent controls. Okay. Rent controls are very, very complicated in New York City. There's different classes of categories of apartments and so on. Okay, but it's clear that today who benefits, and that as we'll see from this article, is certainly people of upper and middle income. People from all walks of life have lucked into rent-regulated New York apartments. Actresses Mia Farrow and Cicely Tyson, the Baroness Ingrid Thyssen, Sidney Biddle Barrows, who was the so-called Mayflower Madam, State Senate Democratic leader at the time, Manfred Orenstein, leveraged buyout specialist Tom Goodwin, and so on. Okay. Now let me give you some idea of the extent to which they benefit. Philip de Montebello, who was the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, pays about $1,900 a month for a 7-room apartment on Fifth Avenue. The market rate would be about $6,000 per month. Okay? So he's being subsidized to the tune of $4,000 per month, okay, or $48,000 per year, okay, by these lower rents. Jack Futterman was the chairman of Pathmark Stores, pays $1,336 a month for an apartment on Central Park South. Okay? That's about half the free market rent. So he's getting $1,300 per month benefit. Alistair Cooke, the late Alistair Cooke, the late writer, the former host of public broadcast Masterpiece Theater, lives in an 8-room apartment on Fifth Avenue overlooking Central Park. The rent is about $1,500 according to the landlord, and in fact would be much, much higher than that amount, okay, on the free market. Some inherit their apartments. So if your relative has lived there from, like, say, 1946, your mother and grandmother, you can inherit the apartment at the same extremely low rent that was in force then. Mia Farrow pays about $2,900 a month for 10 rooms on Central Park West, a fraction of the market value. The actress grew up in the apartment, which was the setting for one of her movies. Okay, her mother, Maureen O'Sullivan, was the one who had rented it. Okay, entertainment lawyer Alan J. Grubman, who has done deals for the likes of Billy Joel, Madonna, Michael Jackson, David Geffen. He pays about $9,000 a month for his rent-stabilized apartment. Okay, now it's an astronomical sum, $9,000. But Mr. Grubman gets the entire 17th floor of an old Park Avenue building that spans half of a city block. His landlord says it's the size of 4 large 2-bedroom apartments, and real estate agents say they could rent it for $20,000 a month. So he's getting subsidized to the extent of $11,000 a month. Okay, and that's why rent controls aren't changed. These people have a lot of political influence. Economists have long pointed out, and I'm not necessarily in favor of this, that if you really want to target the poor, if they cannot afford a free market rent, let's say $900, but only $600, then the way to do that is to send them simply a rent voucher of $300 per month. Okay? Then you would not have any controls. It would still be a market price, and supply would be equal to the demand. There would be no shortage. There would be no deterioration of the buildings and so on. Okay? Now, I think even better than that is, for example, some of these southern cities' policies, Houston's policy of not having much zoning laws and allowing building, which that increase in supply naturally keeps the prices lower. Okay, so that's the story with rent control.